Sex Radio.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Friday. Welcome to the Leadership Blend. Really, Leadership Blend takeover without Ricardo D. Rice. Without friend and host Ricardo D. Rice. Ricardo is on vacation on a cruise over the islands, so don't feel bad for Ricardo for not being here. But we're all here. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves real quick. Starting with you, Kyle.
I'm one of Ricardo's interns called Andrew. How y'all doing?
What's good is Double R.
I'm Simone Cherie. So welcome to Friday. It's October 19th. We're going to break up today a little bit different since we kind of have free reign and free control over the show segments today. We're going to talk about current events, talk about what's been going on this week as usual and get into that. But then we're also going to have a really deep dive about gender, identity, sexuality, how that impacts everybody, which I know will be very educating, very empowering. So it should be a really good day. So
Yeah.
we're going to go ahead and kick it off. I think this week was a big week for like interviews by everybody who's ever been in power. I kind of feel like so. There was a big interview with Hillary Clinton where she kind of caught that work and had to answer a lot of very deep questions. Trump gave an interview on 60 Minutes, which I mean that's the first thing I kind of want to happen.
He shouldn't be on TV.
Trump lives on TV, but Melania Trump I think is the bigger interview.
Yeah.
So her interview has been broadcast for the last couple of weeks because they asked her about her jacket. She's a very quiet woman. We know that she probably did not intend to ever be First Lady of the United States and kind of have this platform. So, I mean, she was asked a lot of very deep questions as well, and I kind of want to get into her interview. But first things first, Trump on 60 Minutes. So last week we talked a little bit about journalist Jamal Khashoggi because he had been missing for, I think, 2 weeks at that point.
Yeah.
There was no proof or any confirmed facts about where he was, and then Saudi Arabia has finally taken responsibility for his murder. He's been presumed dead at this point. Still no body, still no video, but he'd walked into a consulate in Turkey, a different country than Saudi Arabia, and never walked out. So Trump has now finally said that it's probably likely that he's dead, and we should probably do something about it, quote unquote, probably more around the lines of financial sanctions. But we brought this up because journalists in particular have been under fire ever since the Trump administration, and so has the media and how credible the media is. There was obviously the incident at the Washington Post, even in this country. So it's very, very dangerous to be a free speaker, I think, just in the world, especially in certain countries, even Saudi Arabia, whether you're an American citizen or not, which he did have an American citizenship. So the journalist was rumored to have been chopped into pieces. I mean, it was a very, very brutal situation on top of just being unconstitutional.
Missing. And I'm like, how you get to that? Like,
Right.
who gave y'all that info? Like, that was the first thing that I saw. It was like, he's missing, and he may be chopped up into little pieces
Right.
and put in a bag and put in a car that drove away from the consulate the same day.
Yeah.
You walk in a consulate and get chopped up, don't nobody go and check.
But that's the thing is, like, how do you walk into a building and not walk out? Like, so it's like,
But
I
they said
understand
they
why
saw
there
a
were
car
rumors.
that left,
They
but
saw
his
a
wife
car leave, yeah.
or his fiance or something was sitting in the front in a car waiting on him to come out, and he never came back out. And I said this last week. I feel like my man just wanted to disappear real quick. Like,
Look,
we've seen this happen before in the States where, like, a dude will go somewhere and then nobody will see him and he just pop up somewhere else. I feel like that happened. Like, I'd be right again. But the way they were just saying, like, he was just chopped up. And that they was like he got chopped up into little pieces.
yeah, they said he was chopped with a bone saw.
Yeah.
They said he may have been beheaded at one point.
Who?
But rumors like that circulate when you don't have an answer. So Saudi Arabia was silent about it for over a week. They just weren't accepting. They're like, we don't know what's going on. We're looking into it. We're doing our best. But that was all you got for about a week. And they only were called under investigation because of all the other countries, like the international action. They weren't looking into it on their own. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, because they didn't care.
Right.
Like, he wasn't here. How y'all
Right,
gonna just blame it
right.
on us?
But he did write in April. He did write about feeling like it wasn't safe for him. Like he left Saudi Arabia just in like 2016 or 2015, and he moved to the United States. And he was still doing international journalism, but he was living here because he was afraid. So it's like when somebody's afraid of getting killed, and then they turn up missing.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Why was he afraid of getting killed?
because of the Saudi Arabian government. So MSV, which is who their prince is referred to, has been very very ruthless about criticizing the government. And he's put journalists in jail already. I think over 200 journalists have been put in jail since he was in power. So he has not just journalists, but people who have criticized the government. So, I mean, it is enough to be critical of the government for the government to take action on you, which is kind of what our First Amendment was created for.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean,
so,
our First Amendment.
Right, our First
I
Amendment.
mean, America's First Amendment. Because
Ours. Right.
America.
So,
America. Because
Right.
he wasn't, like, how much protection do you think you get, especially with this president being from Saudi Arabia? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
we just seen what he did 2 years ago when he was just going crazy on that country. Like, those people and those people with their head turbans and, like, you insult this and then shout them out and then
yeah.
I don't understand this man. Like, he's
Trump
why?
has not been consistent, and that's kind of the thing. So the first thing that Trump said, which off the cuff he just says, was that we had about $1.2 billion worth of economic interest in Saudi Arabia and that we don't need to be hasty. Because basically people were calling on him to, like, say something, do something, you know, claim that you really want to see this investigation come to an end, claim that you want an independent investigation, like, do something.
But I want to know, like, who is the we? Because I feel like he might have just meant him. Like, he got $1 billion tied up over there.
No,
because
I think
if it's just $1 billion,
he means America.
if it's just $1 billion, I feel like there's something else that we can find somewhere else. Like, if it's that serious,
we could
go somewhere else. But then we don't want to go to China because we see what's happening there.
Well, right.
But
yeah.
they make everything.
We're in the middle of a trade war with China.
They make
unofficial trade war. For sure.
everything.
Yeah.
But, like, what really comes out of Saudi Arabia? Customer service?
Gas. Our gas, our oil. Like, we have lots of interest in Saudi. And here's the thing is, though, that because we were talking about someone's life and because he mentioned $1.2 billion, it basically sounds like you put a price tag on
somebody's head. Like, I guess he worth $1.2 billion. Like, come on, man.
So, at any rate, Saudi Arabia has basically an officially accepted responsibility. There's still no details, per se, as to how this person was killed. But he did have a fiance who was there, technically there, who was outside the consulate at the time. He's not a father, but I mean, he had American citizenship. So I kind of feel like for that reason, it's considered why Americans are so upset. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't just a foreign, person from another country who cannot exercise free speech. This was technically an American citizen. And we do have free speech.
Yeah,
so.
And this isn't the first time. I just don't think that we've ever had a president to just be like, well, we got money tied up there, so maybe we should just wait.
Right, so let's just see what happens.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I think this happened a couple years ago with Obama, with was it Korea, with some reporters
I wouldn't
getting
be surprised
kidnapped?
North Korea. Yeah, I think so.
And you know what I'm saying? He was like, nah, we need to communicate. We need to find out what's going on with them.
Sure.
We need to find out what happened. Trump like, nah, we got $1 billion tied up over there. So
yeah, so let's be careful.
maybe we should calm down.
Yeah.
Because gas price is going to go to $40 a gallon. You know what I mean?
It's funny, but it's like not. It's not funny.
It's not funny, but it's funny because it's him. Like, it's Trump.
And Trump is, because he's so anti-free speech in general. I mean, like, half of the controversy with the NFL with taking a knee and with Trump having so much to say about people taking a knee is that's exactly what the First Amendment was trying to prevent. It was trying to prevent the president or anybody in power from basically saying what you couldn't say. Yeah. Like, the exact reason. So. Anyway, Trump was on 60 Minutes talking about a lot more than just Jamal. He was also talking about Dr. Ford. If you remember the Kavanaugh controversy and Christine Blasey Ford, basically they both gave their own testimonies. Her testimony was over 4 hours long, and he basically mocked Christine Ford at a rally when he was in Mississippi, talking about how she was saying, I don't remember, and doing what he usually does with his hand gestures and stuff like that. And it was pretty insulting, even to people who I think were on Kavanaugh's side, like, which I was very, very frustrated with how little evidence there was. And there was times where I was very frustrated with her saying that she couldn't remember things, right? I mean, but to mock her, I think, is a different situation. Like, I'm not trying to. There's a difference between saying, look, this isn't substantiated, and then, just degrading or debasing someone.
But I think the whole thing is degrading. Like, because if you lied on a national world stage that somebody raped you and was like, I mean, it happened, but, like, I don't remember.
So you believe she lied? You're just saying she lied.
I believe that this whole thing was planted. I believe she's going to get a book deal. She's going to write a book about it, and then we're probably never going to hear about her again.
Is there any evidence at this point?
There was never any evidence. It was a testimony.
I'm not saying I don't believe her, but it's hard to believe her without evidence.
I mean, in like what we were saying when we was talking about like with Cosby, like if it was for people just to come out and that's always been the argument of like the Me Too movement.
Mm-hmm.
How many people can prove that this happened? Because now it becomes your word versus another person's word, and in the court of public opinion, if a woman comes out and say he assaulted me, she's probably right, and he probably did it, because you know that what everybody assumes to be like a rape culture in America is really just like white men doing what white men do.
Well, hold on. So before we
This
go
is being
there,
nasty.
when you say culture, like I think, what about the response? Like, what about the response to that? Because a big part of what comes up when people talk about rape culture is they feel like people's attitudes about it, like the way people treat people. Like if you notice during the testimonies, they were treating Dr. Ford, I think, very, very kindly, very respectfully. They told her, over and over, you're not on trial here.
But she was.
But she wasn't on trial. She was there to give her testimony.
If you give a testimony in court in front of a judge,
technically, yeah. So, but the idea is you're not supposed to shift responsibility when it comes to someone making a statement, right? Like the police, even in like an actual investigation, the police do question witnesses, but they don't interrogate witnesses to the extent that you wouldn't come. Like if you knew going to the police, which this happens a lot, I think in minority communities, you sometimes are afraid to talk to the police about something you witnessed because that may mean you had something to do with it. Like
yeah,
the reason people
you.
Right. So, our response to her,
it depends on the person that you're speaking to. Because there's a difference between getting witness testimony and interrogation. And in our community, there is no difference. There is no difference between getting me saying that I saw something versus me being a part of what I saw. And I think that in her case, you are a part of what you saw. You are a part of what happened. So yes, you need to be interrogated, because there's only one way for me to estimate whether or not you're telling the truth. Your story has to be consistent. Her story was inconsistent. His story was inconsistent. But the one thing that he did admit that he did was, I drank and I stayed on my campus. She said in her testimony, we snuck away from our campus at an all-girls school to go to their campus, which is an all-boys school. And then you had people come through and corroborate your story like, yeah, I remember going there, but nobody can remember anything like this happening to you when you were there.
Yeah. But what do you think about the blaming? Doesn't that also kind of shift blame, though, at the same? Because what we want to do is encourage people to come forward when they hear about things.
That's cool, but don't lie.
Okay, but how do we get people to come forward if they know that they're going to be interrogated? Like, how do you invite someone put someone in the position of this person telling the truth? So if you start from there, this person's telling the truth, and they know that if they have to come forward and talk about this thing, that they're going to be dragged through.
But truth means that somebody, if you present a truth, that means that somebody is presented with a lie. Somebody is lying.
Yeah.
So if you say, well, he's telling the truth and she's telling the truth, it don't work like that. If she's telling the truth, he lying.
I agree.
If he's telling the truth, she lying. And I think in this case, he might have not said everything, but I take his testimony for what it was. I think he was telling the truth. I've been around white people for a long time. I've never seen a white guy just black out. You've never seen
a white person black out?
Nope. I've seen white people go to sleep. I seen the dude pee on himself.
How do you know the difference between somebody blacking out and going to sleep? How do you know the difference?
For you to say that somebody blacked out and then raped you.
No, here's the thing that I do concur with and that I do find to be kind of like biased is that they both were drinking. They both admitted to drinking. She says she only had one beer. He says he was a drinker in college. Like he just admitted, I was a drinker. But if someone can black out and harm someone, and that can be something used against them, like, well, you don't remember, maybe raping someone because you blacked out. Well, then on the same token, you can say, well, maybe you don't remember who did it to you because you blacked out. I feel like it has to be used against her as well. If they're both drinking, you can't just say, well, maybe it's likely you blacked out and you don't remember what
But
you
he
did.
admitted, I get drunk. Never blacked out. And I think,
he did say that.
He said he never I got drunk all the time. Never blacked out. And I think, that would be evidence enough to like, okay, so if you say like you not just like just doing that and nobody saw it. You know what I'm saying?
It's
Like that was the problem.
Mm.
Y'all were at a party. Y'all were drinking at a party. He raped you at a party and nobody saw it.
But that isn't that college culture. Like how far are you in your
school?
collegiate career? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a senior. I'm graduating in
So
December.
college parties, you don't see everything that goes on. Do you go to a lot of parties?
I did. I don't do it much anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, and you can't say you've seen everything that happened in every room at a college party.
I mean, no, you can't say that, but nobody's being observant, especially when there's liquor going around and, whatever other drug. Everybody's just kind of in their own world.
That's a good point. Whatever
So,
other drug.
yeah.
That never was mentioned, I think, in this
Yeah.
whole thing. It was like, we're talking about beer, and that was my biggest question, is like beer. We're talking about beer here.
Yeah.
That people were so messed up over beer. Like, that's the most tame college party I've ever heard of.
But also at
You gotta
college
think about the time
parties.
period too.
Yeah, the thing
Yeah.
the
The
thing
80s?
about the thing about college
It's
parties
cocaine all in the 80s, wasn't it?
is the thing about college parties is no matter how much you're drinking or how much fun that you're having, if somebody come out of the room screaming, the whole thing stop.
Yeah.
Everybody stop. Hey, hold on, what going on? Why she screaming like that? That's not
Lord.
what happened. She admitted that's not what happened. You admitted that you went into a room with a guy.
Mm-hmm.
You assume it was this guy,
Yeah.
but you don't remember when it happened.
It may not
What
have
it-
even been him.
So here's the thing for me. I feel like there's a middle ground here in terms of the reaction, because I don't think she needs to be mocked. And honestly, I think part of what really worked against Kavanaugh was Trump. Like, Trump, our president, is an admitted pervert, and in my opinion, well, no, even I'm not gonna say a rapist, but he's been a sexual deviant. Like, if you say I grab women by the, and I don't even ask permission, you don't even have to ask. So you admitted that you basically assault women.
Yeah.
So
like
to
you
me, for you to be in his corner is not a good. Like, to me, that's the biggest, most suspicious question mark around this whole thing, is that your advocate in the right hand is
this guy.
yeah,
But that's the president.
exactly. So but so to me, it's like, if I'm on trial for assaulting a woman, I don't want Trump's endorsement. I don't
either.
want Trump telling
And
people I'm innocent.
I don't
and I'm a
think that's
great
what
guy.
Kavanaugh wanted. I just think like that's the president. I feel like that's what was happening. Like,
Yeah, I agree.
dang, man, hey man, shut
Probably.
up. Like, I can't tell the president shut up, but bro, shut up. Like,
Yeah, and
Dang.
you can't. But so Trump's quote was, when he was just kind of talking about the situation, he briefly said that he did not. He basically backtracked. He said, I didn't mock her, even though he clearly did mock her. He said, I wasn't disrespectful, even though he was disrespectful. And he said, we won. No matter what happened, we won.
hold on.
That's what upset me.
Just say, Double R, you was right, because I told you. Look, I said when this thing started that it was gonna be a win for Trump, and he admitted that it was a win for Trump. He said we won. He didn't say Kavanaugh won. He said we won. We beat the case.
We is in who? Like, who is we?
Him, the Republican Party.
But see, that's what upsets me so much, is that this is not political. Like, this is not political.
But he made it political.
He did.
It wasn't
he makes
political.
everything political. It is not political. It is not even a contest. It's not a race for you to be talking about that you won. Like,
Yeah.
you don't win these things. It's a case. There's a testimony.
But
There's
it's
like
Trump. It's Trump.
Trump is just a child,
It's Trump.
70-year-old
You
child.
either
If I've
win or you
never
get
seen
fired.
one.
In Trump,
Which
you
is
either
losing
win
to
or you
him.
get fired.
He's like, if you get fired, you lose.
Yeah.
Which is just not. No, if you get fired, then you're basically a sexual deviant, and you should not be working as a judge. And there's actually much bigger implications that are not political.
Yeah.
Talking about we won, like, it's just a disrespect. I think.
I told you
of
she
our
about
process,
to get a
man.
book deal. She about to get a whole bunch
I don't
of money.
think she wants a book deal.
Nah, she about to get a book deal.
I don't think she wants a book deal. So
You can't just go back to teaching.
why not? Now, if she couldn't, then I think she would probably have a good suit on her hands. Like, why can't I go back to see? This is exactly why. That's exactly why people may not come forward. I feel like that could be very
No,
discouraging.
I'm saying she can go back to her job, but like, how comfortable will you be at your job?
What grade
After-
does she teach?
she's a professor.
A college.
Oh, I mean,
How comfortable will you be?
as a college
Sitting-
kid, if my professor went through something like this, I don't think I would care.
But would you ask questions?
No, I just want my grade.
I mean, it was all over. I mean, that's a good point. That's a good. It
Yeah.
is college. It's not, and even still, it was live streamed. So I don't know what questions
And
anyone
they'll
could
argue
possibly
that-
have.
That's what makes this whole thing disturbing. Like, if you care too much, like, why you care so much?
Yeah.
But if you go to class and you like, she come back to class and be like, all right, so, I just want to let everybody know I'm okay. Hey, we don't care. Like, can we hurry up? Because I don't want to be in the class.
In college, I feel like also professors are allowed to have opinions. Like, professors write books about their opinions. Professors can be very, like colleges aren't really, looking for you to be super, super neutral. Your content even can be, like, you can teach a whole class about why the Republican Party's right. So I feel like, for a college to kind of retaliate would be a stretch. But just about Trump in general, kind of dogging women and talking about women a certain way, I feel like that's what kind of fuels the resistance in the piece of that movement. So who does want to written a book is Stormy Daniels, the porn star that he allegedly assaulted, right? And she never was able to prove her suit. She was able to prove that he paid her $130,000, which looks incredibly suspicious. But he had to talk about that a little bit in his interview too. And in the same interview, the tweet came up where he referred to her as like horse face, and it's like stuff like that. Like when you're accused, who's accused of
my man
violating somebody
funny.
And then degrading them.
The thing with that thing is like, baby girl, you're a porn star. Mm-hmm. You saying that this man paid you $130,000 to assault you?
Well, she didn't know that was gonna happen.
You just charged $130,000.
He paid for her silence.
I don't know if he. I think he paid for her silence because he was married.
Okay.
And
but not because he did something wrong?
You cheating on your wife.
He was married to Ivanka at this point?
Melania?
Not Ivanka, Melania?
I think so. Or it may have been Ivana, but he was married.
Yeah, he was married.
To one of them.
And you're cheating on your wife, who you might have a prenup, but if you cheat in a marriage, you probably got to give her like 20% more. She could just dip.
Especially if you're a billionaire.
I mean, he only like $6 billion.
Look.
Like, it's not like a bunch of billions. And we don't even really know if he's worth $6. His assets might be worth $6. But he probably got like $500,000 to his name. In real life, I'm just saying, like, it might not be much, but he gave the girl $130,000 through another guy who about to go to jail. Like, his lawyer is about to go to jail
like,
for paying off somebody. Like, you could have just paid this girl off and said that it was a service.
Yeah.
But you got somebody else to pay her. This dude about to go spend time in jail because they're saying you use campaign funds. Now, it just so happened that he was already, if the man already rich, he probably didn't have to raise much money. I mean, they say usually most of the presidents, if you can raise $1 billion, you can be president. Mm-hmm. If you could raise $1 billion. What about if you got $1 billion?
Right, that's a different thing.
If we saying he worth $6, he probably got $1 billion.
Definitely. To
give away. Like, he got $1 billion. That's all I need to be president? $1 billion?
Yeah.
It makes you question it makes you question the office. Like, so it only costs $1 billion to be president? Oprah got $1 billion.
Yeah. I mean, the price will go up. I'm sure
it's going to go retarded. But if it only costs $1 billion to be president, Oprah got $1 billion. Tyler Perry got $1 billion. It's a couple people that got $1 billion. It's a bunch of people that are not
Mark
great people.
Mark Cuban, who I already know I'm voting for in 2020.
Yeah, if he run.
Absolutely.
Shout out Mark.
But, okay, and we would just be so much better off. I just feel like in general we'd be so much better off.
Yeah.
But
he's a decent man. Like, Trump just like a
child.
I think the only reason why Mark Cuban wouldn't win is because he's not married.
But that would be good too, because that has kind of hung on to a lot of people. Like, who's your spouse? Even when there's women there, like Hillary Clinton gave an interview over this past week too, and she was kind of grilled about Clinton's assault allegations. Like all the women that he supposedly assaulted, there were a lot of lawsuits.
Wasn't assault. He was just smashing
not Lewinsky.
women.
No. He was accused of assaulting women who didn't want it. This was like when he was prior to him
first
being
term,
president.
right?
Prior to him being president, when he was just a statesman. He was accused. And then in office, obviously, the Monica Lewinsky situation. So, and what Hillary Clinton said was basically that she did not consider it an issue of power. She didn't consider it an act of coercion. Even though Monica was an intern, was in her very early 20s, and he was the president of the free world, Hillary was like, no. She believes she was cheated on. She believes that he acted inappropriately, but she doesn't believe that he manipulated someone.
Yeah, like, yo.
Which I was kind of like, okay. And a lot of women kind of felt like Hillary's in a lot of denial. Like, Hillary is not seeing this very clear Me Too situation of like the big executive and the would-be actress or the, you know what I mean? Like, she's not seeing the power struggle.
the reason, like, I can agree and disagree with her, it's Bill. Like, he not like a bad looking guy. He got the check. He could do whatever he want whenever he want. Like, he was already this, and then he became president. I could stand by her and say, like, it wasn't like, girl, I'm the president, I could get you a job. She was under the desk.
Okay, that's just a lot of detail.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just saying, like, when you read the book, she was like, I would go in the Oval Office and be under the desk while he's having a meeting.
Yeah.
That's not like me. That's not me.
I didn't know all that.
Kyle didn't know all that.
That's what I'm saying. That's
now
not
you done
me
told him
having.
some stuff that he
That's
didn't
not
wanna
me
know.
having so much power as the president where I
Yeah.
can get you a job. That's like, nah, like, I need some
Okay.
FaceTime.
So
like,
let me just ask your opinion, Kyle. So what this brought up for me was, my first thought was, well, she's 21. Yeah, she's young. That's a big age gap. But then if you think about the Cosby situation, those women were grown. They were in their 40s.
they
in
were
some
the
cases,
same age as him.
But they didn't have his money. Like, he did have more money. He was obviously incredibly famous, world famous. So it's like, is there always a power deviation between men, or is power just defined by money? Like, is that what gives somebody power over somebody else? Like, or title, or
I think
you know what I
I think
mean?
the world runs around money, especially America. It's a capitalist society, so I think wherever the most money is, that's where the most power is.
So that probably means it's not. So is it manipulation then? Is it, or is it just circumstance? Like, I just happen to have more money, but that doesn't mean I'm. Does that mean that you're taking advantage
like,
of somebody?
does power mean you have influence?
Yes. To
I
me,
think so.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in some cases, I don't believe that.
How?
Because Trump doesn't have much money, but he has a lot of influence.
Well, yeah, but
Like,
you
Trump
said power and
has
influence.
much fame. He has more fame than he does influence, and that I don't think that he's necessarily like the power guy. Like, I don't think he got a whole. I think his name is powerful. Anybody that had the Trump name would be able to do what Trump was doing. Like, if your name was Trump, you could do what he's doing.
Well, that's power.
But I don't think that him, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, he don't got
him as a person.
him as a person. He's not the
what
power.
about him as a
person.
president, though?
I mean,
With
this
the nuclear
America.
codes, he says he has nuclear codes right here.
Yeah, this America. So you would be like, oh, that's power in the world. But like in these streets where people like still view you as just like a weird guy with a toupee that kind of move around in the wind, like they view him as like an obsolete president. He don't really know what he's talking about. He just get up there and run his mouth, but he's funny. So like if your power comes from just you being funny, that mean that we could just get somebody else in the office that's funny. Dave Chappelle could be president.
Yeah, maybe next time
Martin
around
Lawrence
he very
can
well
be
could.
president.
Maybe next
You know
time
what I'm
around he
saying?
really
Yeah.
could. But it's like,
It's interesting.
where I struggle is that makes me think that there's really no way to prevent a power dynamic struggle between people. Because at the end of the day, if you're the most powerful person in the world and you want to sleep with somebody, that
You could
person's
just
going
do
to
that.
have less power than you. So it's like, if that's the case, that kind of means that if you become so influential, you can't mess with anybody.
And
Or
and
it's-
then
you know
it
what I
skews
mean?
the views because like if I do have money and I am in a position of influence versus saying power, if I'm in a position of influence and I want to sleep with you, would that be a power dynamic?
Like,
Because I'm not
right.
coming to you, or I'm not stepping to you like, yo, you know who I am? I'm stepping to you like, what's up?
You know who I am.
Now, I
But
mean,
like, if that person feels pressured, like, what if that person's here to apply for a job, and then you want some? Well, by the way, you know what I mean? Like, then that person could very well feel like, well, I thought this job depended.
but what if you
on-
already work there?
Still, they may
You
wanna-
might wanna keep your job.
Right.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, you can't. It's one of them things. Like, it don't even matter. Like, if I'm the guy, you can't be the guy at the top trying to talk down. Like, you can't. That thing, like, the power dynamic works top down. It don't work
Yeah.
bottom up. So like, I can't be the dude at the bottom trying to get with the woman. That's the thing that we don't see. It's
Right.
like the dude at the bottom that's trying to talk to the woman at the top.
Yeah.
And she the top. We don't see that dynamic. We only see the other way, where it's men talking top down. And it's like it's very hard to like pinpoint when it happened, who it happened to, how it happened,
It is.
if it actually happens. But like you said, I mean, if I'm trying to get a job and you want to talk to me, if I got a job and you want to talk to me, if I want to move up and you want to talk to me,
All right.
then that mean that you trying to get me. You know what I mean? That mean you trying to get me. Dang.
It might. With people like our president. All right, we're gonna wrap this a little bit. I want to get into an Asian American lawsuit right now against Harvard for discriminating against them for being minorities and not allowing them in. So I want to talk about affirmative action a little bit, and we'll get into more when we come back after this.
Don't you through drought and famine, natural disasters, my baby has been around for me. Kingdoms are falling, angels be calling. None of that could ever make me leave. Yeah. Every time I look into your eyes, I see it. You're all I need. Every time I get a bit inside, I feel it. Ooh, who would have thought I'd get you? Ooh, who would have thought I'd get you? And when we're making love, your cries, they can be heard from far and wide. It's only the two of us. Everything I need between those thighs. Every time I look into your eyes, I see it. You're all I need. Every time I get a bit inside, I feel it. Ooh, who would have thought I'd get you? Oh yeah, babe. Ooh, who would have thought I'd get you?
And I'll take some time just to be thankful that I had days full of you, before it winds down into the memories. It's all just memories now.
Don't you love when I come around? Somebody just fill you up, then I take it down. Don't you love when I come around? Somebody just build you up, then I take. Ooh, who would have thought I'd get you? Oh yeah, babe. Ooh, who would have thought I'd get you?
This feels like summer, but you make me feel so alive. Just be my lover.
Saw that thing so beautiful. She just hit my heart, oh. Full force and she got me like, I be like, baby, why you so fine? Got to make you mine. So hard to find. Baby like, oh, how'd you do the thing? The way that you do it and she ain't even show nothing. She be walking around so confident, so heaven sent. I think she was meant to knock them dead. Like, girl, you so fine. Oh, 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 oh. Yeah. Girl, you rockin' like, ooh. She was so sublime, super fine. She was never lying, strutting in the heels or her slides. Either way, eyes on her every single day, week, year. Everyone wondering how she does it with no fear. All that confidence, was it heaven sent? Does it come within? Does it come run out? I don't know. She'll just have them running out and in. Man, they want to sin, talking deadly sin with Mrs. Lady. I don't understand why she hit them like, hey, like, girl, you knock 'em dead. Oh, oh, oh. How you do the thing you do? Woo. Hey, hey. Baby, you knock 'em dead. I'm already said.
Everybody, it's Ricardo D. Rice from the Leadership Blend, and you're listening to IBNX Radio.
Tired of doing the same old thing every Wednesday night? Well, don't. Join IBNX Radio host Jason Carey every Wednesday night from 8:30 p.m. to 1 a.m. for Wild Wednesday, your midweek turn-up. Wild Wednesday, featuring $5 Long Islands, $3 Jello shots, $2.50 PBR, and food specials. Wild Wednesday, with free arcade games, half-price bowling, and half-price kart racing. Wild Wednesday, featuring award-winning host and entertainer Jason Carey, Mr. Morning Coffee Swig himself, providing the soundtrack and the entertainment all night long. Playing your favorite hits of today and yesterday. Wild Wednesday with Jason Carey every Wednesday night, 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. Free entry for guests over 21 and $10 cover for anyone 20 and below. Wild Wednesday goes down at Andretti Marietta, located at 1255 Roswell Road, Marietta, Georgia. That's 1255 Marietta, Georgia, every Wednesday night. Pull up!
All right, everybody. Happy Friday. We're back on the Leadership Blend. We are doing a Leadership Blend takeover for normal host Ricardo D. Rice. I'm Simone Cherie. I'm going to have everybody kind of go around, reintroduce themselves real quick. Kyle
Andrew.
Double R.
Rhea Washington.
All right. So when we left, we were talking a lot about kind of this week and Trump's interview this week. But there's also another big proceeding going on that I think we should really get into. It's Harvard University. The number one school in the country, according to U.S. Newsweek. Harvard's admissions trial has begun. So basically, Harvard has come under fire by a group called Students Against Fair Admissions. Basically, it's a nonprofit organization. They do have a 501c4 arm, but the university has been accused of bias against Asian Americans. So how this kind of played out was that colleges since the 40s and 50s have had discretion about who's allowed to be admitted to the university. They say that they look at applicants wholly. If you remember any of those from our own college experiences, they're like, we're not just looking at your test scores, we're not just looking at your grades, we're looking at what you can bring to the university and all these different aspects. So essentially, the lawsuit has been brought by those students all over a high school student named Michael Wong, who's become kind of the lead plaintiff because he had a 4.6 GPA, he had taken honors courses, he had lots of extracurriculars, volunteer activity, et cetera, on his background. And Harvard had been accused of rigging their admission process against Asian Americans specifically. Their applicants tended to have higher test scores, higher grades, et cetera. And there were students allowed in who did not meet those same qualifications, who are mostly black and Latino, or black and Latino for the most part. So the trial just opened this past week on Monday. There is no jury, so it's not a typical court proceeding, and essentially whoever gets the final word according to the U.S. court judge will have the final word. But it can be appealed and end up in the Supreme Court, which is why it's getting so much media coverage, because we have a new person on the Supreme Court who we got into a little bit ago. Who we
Mr.
could
Grabby Grab.
Listen,
Sir.
we're not going to call him names. But yeah, so essentially that's what's going on. The attorney in the case, basically, his name is Adam Mortara. He's represented a lot of different conservative and civic sorts of organizations. So it's a court trial, it's a judicial proceeding, but it's also very, very political. And there's also a lot of, I think, conversation now happening about what Asian Americans represent as minorities. Like, are they considered a model minority, sort of a perfect minority to use in this case? You know, are they supposed to be protected by affirmative action? And if they are, is affirmative action actually hurting them? So, I mean, kind of outside of this, we talked, I think, on the show about affirmative action a little bit, but...
Yeah, when we brought this up before, because
Yeah.
this isn't the first time this has happened, to this school in particular.
True, that's true.
But as we all know, like Harvard, like other prestigious universities, they have a quota that they have to meet, especially for minority students. And we know how this looks. So, and it's the same thing with other schools that are in the top percentile of schools like USC,
True.
Michigan State, Duke. Like, they all have a quota that they have to meet on minority students. I mean, it's one of those things, like, especially when you look at their department numbers for Harvard University, and then you see who dominates the department, and then turn around and say, no, we're being discriminated against. Y'all dominate a whole department at a school.
That's
Like,
true.
There isn't a black student, like, there isn't a department at Harvard that's all black.
That's true.
You know
That's
what I'm
true.
saying? Like, y'all have a whole department. Like, y'all run the department. You are the majority in that department. Versus you can't be a majority at that school because we just started getting in that school. We, like, us all as minorities just started, like, this is very new. Harvard hasn't always had those doors open like that. And no, you're not going to get in. You know what I'm saying? Like, they have the right to deny you.
Yeah, true. And like when this failed before, this failed in Texas at the University of Austin because there was a white student, a female student who could not get in and said basically the same thing, that she thought it was because a lot of less qualified brown and black students got in. But her test scores were like, I mean, she had like a 3.8 GPA, not a bad GPA, but not a 4.6. And her test scores were considered average. Like, so there's other reasons that the school was like, listen, we just didn't feel that you have a lawsuit here. You don't have really a cause for complaint, because there were brown and black students with better grades. In this case, they pulled enough data to kind of say, well, actually, a lot of the Asian applicants were better qualified to be in the school, quote unquote. And so...
Then who?
Well, then some of the brown and black students who did get in.
And then you have to bring the question, like, so are the Asian students more qualified to get in than the white students?
Well,
And then are the black students more qualified to get in than the white students? But this is a predominantly white school, so of course not.
the college is basically arguing that they have an interest in race-picking students. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
they've said that before. And they've said, like, when it came up a couple years ago, like, you can have a great GPA and have great test scores, but somebody can have a lower GPA and higher test scores and can get in. And it's like one of those things like we saw it like with private schools being able to test into a school,
Right.
and parents like kind of arguing like, well, my kid has better grades and this and this. Is it because they're this that they can't get into a school? Well, a lot of times kids can have great grades, and you can test well, but then there are other people that test better, and their grades might not be better. But being able to test into a school is like letting you in school based on potential. Like great people, like if you already smart, you getting anywhere. But we still got a quota to meet. Like we can let you in, but nah, we need Brandon. We need him because we have a quota to meet, and that's something that these schools will never like come out and blatantly say.
So you believe they do have a quota? Because they're saying they don't have a quota. You're saying
No,
they
they
do
have a quota. We know they have a quota. If you look at the numbers of black students that graduate from Harvard every year, it's not like a high number. But we argued 20 years ago about not being able to get to Harvard.
Well, right.
So they had to boost that because according to the numbers, you are the number one school. You're we know what it means to be a Harvard graduate.
Sure. So Kyle, do you think that's fair? And then I want to ask you, Ria, kind of what you think. But do you think it's fair that a school can kind of look at your race too? And like,
I was actually over here just thinking, I think that the race when you check off your race, I think that should be removed from the application process in general. I think they should only be concerned with your grades and your GPA. I think that's the only thing that really matters. I know they have to say, well, we have a certain percent of this group, racial group that goes here and that, but I don't think that it matters at the, in the forefront. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I have to say about it.
So let me ask you something. So not for Harvard, but for another institution, they pulled data of their admissions, and they found out that looking at grades alone, just grades, they didn't talk about test scores, that there'd be a third of the brown and black population still there if they literally just took all their applications and put them in grade order. So whatever the diversity is, like even if it's just 10% brown or 10%, basically it would go down to 3% if they were only looking at grades. So they have used kind of color to say, okay, we're going to bypass, we're not going to just make it grade focused when they say they're going to look at the whole person. They have decided, like the University of Michigan, the law school, when they were accused of this, basically said, we have an interest in having a diverse student body because we think it makes the classroom discussions better. We think that those kids bring more to the table in certain areas, and so we have a reason of doing that. But they said if you took away, there would be a lot less of us maybe in those places. So Rhea, do you think it's fair? Just to look at race in admissions, period.
I think it is fair to consider it. I've talked to a lot of different college recruiters, even as I'm applying to grad school right now, and a lot of them do talk about the fact that they want to diversify things just in the sense of not only looking at grades and test scores because that can limit a student's potential. That doesn't necessarily speak to their work ethic just because adversity plays a big part in the results of those grades and test scores. What if your parents couldn't necessarily afford you that tutor that the white students got and then, boosted up their ACTs or the SATs by a bunch of points? So essentially, by not only just looking at grades and test scores, but also considering race, I think they're considering all those other factors that race plays into when it guides your education and the actual outcomes of those numbers that aren't just reflected in the numbers if we're just, comparing them purely based on that.
Okay, well,
and you miss out on the money. Like
So-
that's the one thing that colleges, not just like Harvard or Stanford or Yale, they're not going to admit to. But if you look at the money that they get, because most students that usually apply to Harvard usually don't live where Harvard is.
yeah,
'Cause
they have a
if
diverse
that was a
population
thing-
around the country. That's true.
That's what I'm like. If you got more people coming from around the country to go to your school versus people that live near your school to go to your school, what does that say about the people that live near your school? Because as we know, that most of the population.
Boston is very white.
That's what I'm saying. So if everybody in Boston can't get into Harvard,
Well, that's fair.
you know what I'm saying? So if you look at the population of students that pay out of state tuition to go to Harvard,
Well, they have one tuition, period. They have one tuition. Just like, them and like 3 other private schools, I think, just have one tuition. It's high as heck. $40K plus a year.
a year
Yeah, but that's for everybody.
versus me going to
No, that just broke Kyle's heart.
versus you going to Georgia State or going to
Right.
another school. And for black students,
Right.
the name of your school means something, especially if it's Harvard.
But so
Yale
why for
or
black and
Stanford.
not Asian? Like, that's the question that's going to come up in this lawsuit because the plaintiff is not white. So normally when we hear the anti-affirmative action
It's black.
argument, it's
I mean,
a
it's
white
black and
person
white,
saying
yeah.
that they've been undercut by a minority. But in this case, Asians are a minority, or
I mean,
according to some people, they may not be.
Yeah, in America, they're a minority.
Okay. So does that mean that it's a fair question? Because it's not about.
It's a fair question, but the argument for affirmative action is what makes this thing muddy. Because now you create conversations for everybody to be able to put their foot in the mud. Like, well, so if white people can now use affirmative action to go against schools to say that they're being denied.
Mm-hmm.
Black people already did it, so can we still use that argument? Now we gotta find a new argument because everybody using our argument to argue about not getting into school. Now we gotta find a new argument. Now our argument has to. So our test scores got to be his test scores. Our grades got to be his grades now.
Yeah,
for us to say, oh no, we're being denied and we're black.
Right, but so Kyle, that's what I was gonna ask you. Like Taria's point, just what is. Do grades have something to do with your color too? Like, are there certain backgrounds, like economic backgrounds, that may make your grades better than other people's grades?
Resources. You might not have black. I hate to use the black community, but there are kids in the black community who don't have the resources because their community and their schools can't afford the books that they have in the white communities or the Asian communities. And you said that Asians were a model minority. I do think that Asians are a model minority. I think that white people kind of embrace Asians and say to everybody else, this is what you guys should be or it should look like. So I definitely do believe in that. Yeah.
Is that like you think that's a widely held belief? Do you think Asian Americans would grant that?
No,
they don't like it. Now it doesn't benefit them, but that's definitely what's happening.
And because a lot of the time you see Asians are more independent than other minorities. They might be the most independent minority. I mean, their businesses, like
Asian owned stuff.
Everything that you usually see them connected to is usually theirs until it's school. Like until school, that's the only time you see them kind of have to embrace something else that doesn't belong to them because they usually shop for themselves, buy from themselves, they eat, the food, everything usually is them until school. And I think the problem, like I said, like for black and brown kids, is now you got to find a new argument because this just made your whole argument muddy. Because he does have a good point. If my grades and my test scores are better, then it would be race.
That's what he's basically saying. He's saying that his race is basically counting against him because he said with those scores, had he been black, he probably would have got in, or had he been Latino, he probably would have got in with a 4.6.
But his argument is that there's somebody that got in ahead of me and their grades wasn't even close.
Right.
Are there any Asians that go to Harvard?
There are.
Yeah. They have their whole science department is dominated.
Now that's the faculty too. But they do. And they have, so Asian Americans, they said in terms of the population, they had represented maybe like 12 or 11% of the people who are school age who could apply basically. And that's how many people are actually admitted in the student body. But what this guy is saying, okay, so you can't have another percent because you have to let in a brown or a black student. Is that really fair to me, basically?
It's always going to be that argument.
My thing is like, isn't this creating levels of minority?
Yes.
And like, if there are levels of minority, then how contentious could it get? Like, isn't that going to create like a whole bunch of people like, forgive the expression, but crabs at the bottom of a barrel? Like, okay, you're a minority, but I'm a minority with one parent. Okay, well, I'm a minority with one parent, but I also have, I was from a poorer neighborhood than you were. Well, I was from a poorer neighborhood than he was.
But it's always been that.
But
that's what people argue like people that argue affirmative action, that's always their argument. Because affirmative action says that minority. Well, then the argument becomes like, I'm black, you black, she black, she black. We're all a different type of minority.
I have a theory that this is an idea that it was made to put minorities against each other instead of focus on the main problem that we're all.
It's separated. Separated the minority.
Yeah.
But like this was a minority. This was a minority goal. Like, this was the NAACP's goal, though, was to have affirmative action.
Yeah, but affirmative action was supposed to represent black people.
Colored people.
Black and brown. That's, if you read it.
They believe Asians were never intended to be protected by.
I think that if you ask the people that fought for affirmative action, they never intended that Asians would be counted as a minority because everybody that was a minority never counted Asians as a minority because
Never
they could flip
counted?
flop.
They never counted?
They could flip flop. That you can be
How?
accepted because they can be accepted in communities that weren't black, like white communities.
But that's the case more so maybe now. But that wasn't the case back. I mean, there was a time where, I mean, there was just as many slurs for Asian Americans as there were.
Yeah, it was,
for,
but the problem is that you still can't stop their business. You can fight them as much as you want to, but they dollar it's gonna stick with them. With other communities, like especially with brown and black communities, if any time brown and black people died to fight for something for brown and black people, and then everybody just jump in and argue affirmative action, because you're starting to see that with the gay community, the transgender community, the church. Everybody argues affirmative action. It muddied the waters. So now you got multiple people saying that I'm a minority arguing against other minorities about being a minority.
That's true.
How
That's
strong
true.
is your argument?
I
You know what
feel
I'm saying?
like
Like, how strong is your
Maria,
argument?
go ahead.
Personally,
and
I feel
speak
like
in the locals.
Sure. Personally, I feel like the strength of your argument should really boil down to the amount of systemic racism and oppression that you faced over the entire history of our country, and then that kind of buying into your percentage of how much help you should get right now in the moment as we recreate that that framework and that hierarchy to get us all on the same level. So essentially, if Asian Americans are already here at an advantage because they have their businesses, they have all this financial support that the black community doesn't have for various reasons, then what if we just allow black people to get up to that point where we're finally at that same 12% in Harvard as they are, and then we can finally be on equal playing field, essentially.
But this America. It
So what?
ain't never gonna be equal for nobody. That the history has shown that no matter how much you try to argue equality, you never have the same people arguing. Like Martin argued it, Marcus argued it, Frederick Douglass argued it, dead. Like eventually somebody got to come through and keep the argument going, and it got to a point where like things were cool, so you didn't have to argue as much. Cause it's like, well, look what we gave you. Like, look at your numbers. Look at how much you can put $1 trillion into the economy. So, we don't have $1 trillion.
But I think the thing that is problematic is that colleges really are, and still, even though the economy is changing, they're launching pads for a lot of different types of people. Like they open doors and windows to opportunity. Like every college doesn't get Supreme Court justices rolling through there on a regular basis, or doesn't become the birthplace of the next big app or whatever piece
Or
of
the
technology.
DA,
So there
or-
is a lot to be said for where you went to school and what you had access to. So it's kind of like, to me, there's a high pressure position, I think, for colleges like that, for institutions like that, to say, okay, well, what are you doing to either keep things the way they are or make them better, like with who you're letting in. But my big thing is like, okay, does the same argument apply to like so-and-so state? You know what I mean? Like to this state college or this community college. It's like if the college isn't as prestigious, like do they have an obligation, or do only top tier schools have an obligation?
Yeah, it makes
how
you
do you
question
assign that?
who
has
the
to be
important-
responsible
yeah.
for it? You know what I mean?
Because like Harvard is like the prestigious school,
Right.
but like if Georgia State don't do it,
Yeah, like can they say like, well, we don't have an interest in who comes? You know what I mean? Like how do you?
Well,
Who's
I think-
responsible?
I think everyone's responsible, first of all, but
Yeah.
the responsibility more so lies on the more exclusive schools because they're called exclusive schools for a reason. But when it goes to Georgia State, we have people out here mad that we bought the Turner Field Stadium. And I'm looking at it like, but look at that extra opportunity that we're getting because we're not that exclusive school. We're trying to provide those same kind of resources and slowly match ourselves up to these schools that are pretty much out of reach for more people, but giving it to the people that Georgia State might be their only option because they're a first-generation student, because they're an international student who can't already know they're not going to be in that little small percentage of Asian kids that get into Harvard, or et cetera,
like
et cetera.
Georgia State will be, what is this? That 4 years football, 4 or 5 years. This will be the first year, or last year I think was the first year that I think they might have got one student drafted. Think about if Georgia State 20 years ago had a football team, 30 years ago had a football
Right.
team. This is like brand new. So like the argument is going to be so muddy that now you might have somebody like, so why I can't get into Morehouse?
Well, there are. I mean, listen,
And we've seen that.
Yeah.
Like we've seen that.
And
like,
I've also seen black people take back that same stance of, listen, there's supposed to be safe spaces for minorities, and this is supposed to be a safe space. I've seen that exact
but he
same
Asian,
argument,
and he gonna argue that he a minority.
which he is. And like to me, it becomes dangerous when you start saying that, well, Asians aren't really a minority. I find that very dangerous because it's still very visceral in my mind. Like the Japanese There were like 120,000 Japanese Americans who were wrangled up and persecuted, or excuse me, prosecuted and thrown in jail. Like there's, you know, I don't really think we should be rating minorities. I think it's just enough to be a minority.
Like
They
you
did it
said, like
first. They already did it.
Yeah,
But we shouldn't allow that. We shouldn't decide that like, okay, listen,
But then
Asian
it's up
person,
to the
you
people.
don't have a claim to this.
It's up to the people. Like the Asians, like you have Asia, and we call all of it Asia. But like you have the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Korean. They argue who is the minority with each other. Like we know, like China's numbers is.
But like, what if Harvard did that for us? Like, if you think about it, if Harvard said, okay, well, we're going to really rank minorities, and they said, okay, well, here's a black student, here's another black student, okay, but I see some pigment differences, so we're going to go with the
But not
darker
by
skinned
color.
person.
That's what he
or
was
we're going to
saying.
go with the kinkier hair. We're going to have a real minority. Like, what if we had Harvard ranking people like that, like down to the T of how minority they
But
are?
I think that's what they're saying. Like that's where the argument is started. It's starting to become that. Like all y'all are black, but like you said, like you got a one parent, you got both parents, but your dad don't work.
Right.
You an orphan.
Right. So that's
I
a
grew up
real
with-
gem right there.
I
Like,
grew
you know
up
what I
with
mean?
my grandparents. So you in the orphanage. I grew up with my grandparents. You got one parent. You got both parents, but only one of your parents work. Now you got 4 different people. We're 4 different types of minority.
Right.
It's going to become like you get to pick and choose who you get to put in that minority group. And then out of that, you got to go in that group and say, all right, so how many of y'all black? Because it's mad white people that fit into these same minority categories.
They do.
And then you have to argue that it's just too much.
I'm torn. I'm very torn
it's so
between
muddy.
what
Yeah.
they should include. I do think that schools should have a right to consider race, but I also feel like at the same time they should be considering way more than just that. And the pressure to kind of be really multifaceted in a way, like I remember feeling like that in high school or whatever, when I was looking at college applications, they were saying, well, what have you done extracurricular? What have you done that's like not political? What have you done that's just strictly volunteer? And then they were like, don't include church, or don't include this, or don't include that. Like, just what else? Have you ever written any books before? Have you been published if you've written those books before? How many awards have you won before? And it's like, it's a lot, but at the same time, that's really the only way you can say you're getting a comprehensive picture. Like, getting a really, really, really poor black kid to me is not, like, it doesn't warrant a Nobel Peace Prize. It doesn't warrant like an equality award. It's like, okay, so
Yeah, you let a poor kid into
Right.
Harvard. So what? How long are
Right.
you gonna stay there?
that's how you make it a quota to me.
Will he graduate?
And how much debt is he going to accumulate?
That's
true.
going to be the argument.
True,
That's
true.
going to be the number one argument, because you could let this Asian kid into school, but then what if he drop out? What if he like, Harvard is garbage?
Right. But so
What about the kids that can't even afford it, even if they're not the lowest of the barrel as far as minorities go? They might be like a lower middle class kid. They end up getting into Harvard because they have the best grades, whatever. And they finally get in there and they can't even afford it. They end up in debt. Wouldn't it have been better to let the kid in who might not necessarily have qualified in the same way, just so they could get all those benefits of getting all that financially, getting all those scholarships, getting all those things that the other kid wasn't qualified for? But this other kid is really hardworking, and they've shown that they're an entrepreneur, and they're about their life. So they go out to another school, like me at Georgia State, for example. I got into a bunch of really awesome schools that I couldn't afford, and wasn't trying to be $100,000 in debt for by the end of college.
True.
But now I'm over here hustling that much harder for it because I know that I'm at a disadvantage compared to that kid that got in Harvard.
And that's the thing where I feel like there's a silver lining, is because at some of these schools, especially like the top 10, top 20 private schools, they have aid programs. Like they have, if you make under a certain amount, that they take care of certain things. But other colleges don't have that. Like state schools don't have that.
Yeah, they don't offer
So
that.
you get the federal limits, whatever the federal limits
It's
are.
because they'll say, well, you qualify for a grant, and then the grant is supposed to match whatever you would get in aid per year, and then that's how you pay for school.
Right.
But then what about when that run out? Then
That's
I'm
true.
just left
That's
like
true.
coming out of my pocket.
That's true.
And the thing about a school like Harvard, I think Harvard does it, Yale does it, Stanford does it. Like if your family don't make a certain amount of money, they'll pay your tuition.
Yeah.
But that
And they
cutoff
can
is
afford
so
to.
low. It's so low. They say they'll consider other things, like if your parents are really in debt, like even if they make a certain amount of income, like what else is affecting you financially? But
Yeah.
once it actually comes around, they end up offering you nothing, even though your family is really struggling financially. So then you're just sitting in
Well,
there
like
in a hole.
Emory does. I can say that for sure, because Emory had the same program where it was, if your parents make a certain amount, then they'll take care of it, or if they make a higher amount, then they'll just cap your loans. So
Yep.
you do have to do whatever the government will let you, but then they'll pick up the rest.
Yeah.
So, like, should the argument start before school? Like, should it start with, like, the Department of Education offering these garbage loans?
Maybe.
Because if
We have all these countries out here that offer free higher education to everybody.
now in a country like this, where like we claim we so far in debt, but we create our currency. Like, it's hard to argument debt versus creation of currency. And I think that if you have 100,000 students that can potentially go to school every year, and out of those 100,000 students, they estimate that at least half won't finish. And then out of the half that do stay in school, only half of them will graduate on time. So how much money can you offer 100,000 students that won't stay in school?
Right.
You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like, how much would that cost? If you say 100,000 students, you give 100,000 students 10,000. This is how much money, like, they estimate that they give away in grants every year to 100,000 students. So 100,000 students get $10,000 a year to go to school. $100 million that you just gave away. If you're talking about how many of those students gonna graduate, just gave away $100 million. Can we afford to give away $100 million every year?
I mean, I definitely think there should be stipulations because there are a lot of students, even in college right now, comfortable with their parents paying all their money off, but then are out here partying, not worried about their grades, not attending class.
True.
So there definitely has to be effort on the students' part. But as far as the actual way we would do it, I'm not sure personally, but we have all these other countries doing it, so why can we just follow their model?
Yeah, well, see,
Because
that makes
the
me-
argument
yeah.
is like economy. You
Taxes.
argue the economy of other countries versus the economy of America. And then when you start arguing the economy, then when you look at the numbers, you say, can they truly afford to keep giving that many? Because they're not giving that many. They're not giving 100,000 students tuition for every year.
Are you talking about in foreign countries?
Yeah, not
College is
100,000 every
free.
year.
College is free, like, across the
But-
board over
Yeah,
there.
but I'm
But-
saying how many students, like in Asia, 100,000 students not going to college every year because it's a rule. Like, all y'all can't go to school. Everybody can't go to school, just like everybody can't have 2 kids, or everybody
They
like
still do that?
China just
Yeah,
China just
they-
overturned
like,
their
they just-
one-child policy.
But like everybody can't go to school, and in some countries you can't leave the house.
But
If you're a woman, you gotta stay in the house.
But it proves that the money has to come from somewhere, right? So nothing is ever free. The money comes from somewhere. It may come from individual income taxes. It may come from consumption taxes. It may come from, but it comes from somewhere. It's just that the student right now isn't signing a contract to pay it.
And
That's the difference.
I don't want to say like that would be a good idea, but
I worry about it.
the only way it would ever make sense is because you have to look at like the parents of the students. Like, if I got a middle class parent and then I go to school, but then I don't finish, but my mom name on my loan, like, what does that do to my mother's credit?
Oh, jack it up.
I don't ever have
Completely.
to pay for it. She will. So like, should there be a contract for? Should there be something, a stipulation for me being a student to go to school, where you offer this amount of money, but I have to graduate,
Or
Now-
what though?
or
That's the
you
thing,
got to
or
pay
what?
back that loan.
Well, you do,
have to
that,
pay
but
back.
that's the current situation.
The
I
current
mean, even
situation.
if your parent passes, it's on you because they're as the person who's responsible for the debt. They can take that on for you. But those cosign loans, which were way more popular before the Parent Pluses, that's how it went. It's like, okay, this person's responsible unless they're not, and then they can come after you.
I'm
as the
saying like,
student.
if you don't graduate, like, nah, that's all you be.
I know my mom made me sign a contract.
But if you
like
graduate,
immediately, that I had to, she made me sign a contract that I was going to
Yeah,
finish
yeah.
and that I was going to have to pay it back. That she was not going to pay it back.
I mean, my mom told me straight up, you're an athlete, you're
Right.
smart. If you go to school and your GPA drop below a 2.5, I'm not giving you nothing.
So while we're talking about college, there's something I also kind of want to bring up. So we talk about sports like very, 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 very rarely. But what they're creating, I think, right now, and it is mostly for basketball, is that you can kind of bypass the college process in the first place. So there's like an elite percent of
Yeah,
high
that's not new.
schoolers. The elite percent of high schoolers, though, now who are picked can go straight into can just go straight into the NBA if they're picked. So it'll be a very, very small percentage, but they no longer have to go, because the argument has been, if you know exactly what you want to do, then what's the point in going to college for like a semester or so? Like, it won't help everybody. But I think there's something to be said for, especially now that we're even questioning like how many people should be in college and why, and is it really a good idea? like maybe now this is a great thing, but there's also people who say that, okay, an 18-year-old who may or may not play sports, may or may not become the next Michael Jordan, is only going to have so many options. And they can only play for so long.
Nobody's going to become the next Michael Jordan.
Well, but should you shortchange the college experience if a career may only last 5 years or 10 years or 12 years?
I mean, you usually only argue that, like with football, most football players' careers is only 3 years.
Okay.
At the most.
So even more so.
But rookie contracts are 3 years. So if you get in the league and you get a rookie contract and then you, at 2.5 years, when your rookie contract is about to expire and you're still healthy, then you can get a major contract, but football contracts aren't guaranteed. So you actually have to be on the field, but your season is only 16 weeks in the regular season. But if you get hurt out of that 16, you still got to show up to even get a check. But then your money isn't guaranteed. So if you get an $80 million deal, but you get $20 million guaranteed, you have to pay all those games to get that 80, to even get close to it. Well, whether with basketball, I can give you a $130 million contract, but at least 80% of your contract is guaranteed. So even if you don't play, but you're still on the team, you're on the roster, you'll still get paid. And I think we saw this like in the 90s where the largest class of Hall of Famers got drafted the same year in 96. One of the largest class of Hall of Famers ever drafted was 96. So you get Kobe, Vince Carter, AI, Steve Nash, Dirk Nowitzki, like all these players getting drafted in the same draft. All these guys are Hall of Famers. Only one of them actually still playing, and that's Vince Carter. And Dirk, he's still on somebody. He's still on Dallas team, but, you know what I mean? But everybody's not going to be that.
Right.
And because rules are changing, I think that it creates an environment for players to come into the game. Like if you're 7 feet and you play center but you can't shoot, you're probably not going to go to the league. But you're 7 feet. What other job you going to get?
Yeah.
Like, I doubt that it's a dude like that's 7 feet, like at Office Depot. You know what I'm saying? Like, he not trying to be there. But if you 18 and you play basketball, like, your goal would probably be, like, let me go to college and try to get they can't do it now.
What about the bias in race for just picking high school students in the first place? Like, there was, I think it was the NBA that was under fire, actually, for supposedly, like, there was coaches that basically were found that they have a racial bias in even picking, like even in a lineup, when they're talking about students that they may draft.
I mean, then
But
you
then
point
I
the
feel
finger
like-
and you be like, everybody black.
But see, then I feel like minorities are like, especially black people are like, well, it is what it is. But when it comes to other things, it's
I mean,
like,
we be
well, no.
lit though. The problem is that we be really good. Like, we're really good at
See.
Like, that's not an argument. LeBron came out of school as the number one. He was the number one prospect in the country. Mm-hmm. You can't argue the number one prospect in the country. The number two prospect in the country was Carmelo. You can't the numbers don't lie. And then they get to the league and have Hall of Fame careers. You don't. I named the last white player that had a Hall of Fame career that they got drafted in that same draft.
What I'm saying is that, like, you can't, like, there was a Harvard business sociologist who basically did this study and said essentially that they, even before coaches were looking for their best players, they immediately just had an eye, like a racial lens and a racial eye towards recruiting certain types of players. And those players were black players.
That you will assume that they play better.
Right.
But then they actually are better.
So I felt that same argument is made from the Asian American student in this case, like from the Michael Wongs of the world, who are like, listen, I have a 4.6 GPA, which I was a senior before I even knew you could get more than a 4.0. I didn't even know that's something you could do. I didn't know something anybody would aspire to do.
Yeah.
But he went to high school with the same mentality that I'm going to go to Harvard when I get out this thing. And then he couldn't go because
they have
Brandon or Carlos or whoever who had lower grades got in and he didn't get in. So it's like, how do you use race in one sense and justify it, and then in another sense you're like, oh, okay, well.
I'm not saying that it's justified. I'm just saying that a lot of times that we are actually better, and it just so happened that in school he better. But if you apply to a different school, you get in.
So he just shouldn't be trying to go to Harvard?
I'm saying, like, if they already met the quota and they telling you that they met the quota, then go apply somewhere else.
See, and they're saying they ain't even got a quota.
Because in sports, in basketball, that happens. It's a lot of players that are really good coming out of high school, coming out of college. They don't all go to the league. So if you got 500 kids that's looking to get drafted every single year, you get like 120. And then everybody can't go to the G League. So you got to go play somewhere if that's what you want to do with your life.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
I feel like basketball and school are two different realms though. For basketball, you're looking at the results of what they can actually do. For school, they might be looking at what can we mold the student into, even though they don't have those grades that we're looking for necessarily, or we didn't let in someone who has better grades than them. Because at the end of the day, the results that
Aren't
come
they
out of
both about
college-
potential though? Like, can't you be
Right.
the in high school and then suck? You know what I'm saying? So it's
yeah,
like
I
the
mean,
same
we seen
thing with
that
college.
with,
It's all potential
with Okafor,
based.
like one number one prospects in the country, get drafted, got hurt first year, came back second year, scored 2 points, got hurt again. Like we've seen that before.
Yeah.
But if you and I hate when people argue potential because you can't quantify potential.
Yeah.
You can
and
say,
they're
"Oh,
trying.
that look good," and the more you try to quantify potential, you end up making somebody look real bad when they don't live up to it.
Right.
So if you get a 4.6 in high school and you can assume that you can go to Harvard and do the same thing, and then you don't do it, it kills your it'll kill your self-esteem because now you haven't achieved that thing that everybody told you were good at. Like if LeBron was as good as he was in high school and then get to the league first game, he gets shot blocked and he only score 2 points and he come back next season, he average 10. Like if you go from having a Hall of Fame career as a high school student and then you only average in the league, that I think that's the transition in education. You can have a Hall of Fame career in high school.
Yeah.
And then you go to college and it's not the same. Like I realized that real fast.
So what they probably need to start looking at too is just like how students tend to perform at the outcome, like when they do graduate, rather than just like who they were when they came in. But we'll get into this a little bit more. We're gonna have a really deep dive about gender and identity and sexuality, what that means,
Yep, all these terms.
our culture,
Gotta explain it
yes,
to your boy.
terms and policy and how they affect everybody, no matter what you identify as. So as soon as we come back, we'll get into that a little bit more on the Leadership Blend.
Attention sports fans, tailgate season is here, but you can't keep doing what's been done. It's time for a change. A change? Yes, a change. This year, take your tailgate game to the next level with mobile tailgate parties. That's right, mobile tailgate parties. Throwing all-inclusive tailgate parties since 2011. What? All-inclusive? Yes, all-inclusive. Rent the ultimate tailgate party trailer for the day or the weekend. We'll even travel out of town to do your party. Throwing the best party couldn't get any easier. Our fleet of trailers range in size and price from economy to deluxe. Each trailer comes equipped with a large screen TV, coolers, audio connections for music and amplified sound, satellites to broadcast your game, a grill, and the ladies' favorite part, a private bathroom. No more porta potties for your guests. Score! Or upgrade your experience. The deluxe tailgate experience could include event consultant, a grill master, rain-ed grilling, multiple TVs, tents, chairs, a DJ, host, and more. The big game is coming, so get your free quote today at 678-516-1312. That's 678-516-1312. Or visit us on the web at www.mobiletailgateparties.net. That's www.mobiletailgateparties.net. Be the envy of the lot this season with mobile tailgate parties.
All right, welcome back to the Leadership Blend. We're doing a Leadership Blend takeover. I'm Simone Cherie.
I'm calling Andrew.
Double R.
Ria Washington.
All right, so before we left, we said we really wanted to get into gender identity, and we talked about this on I think an after show 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then Double R spoke, and I was like, oh, we really need some help in this area. This is a really important issue.
I'm confused by the terms and
He's just confused, which happens and is okay, but we fortunately have some young people in the room, and so I feel like, especially as far as I can tell, young people have kind of been at the forefront of this conversation. So I was like, we got to take this opportunity and kind of do a lot to talk about gender and sex and sexuality and why it's important for absolutely everybody. So we have Ria here, and I kind of wanted you here to kind of give a background about what we're talking about when we say gender, and then what we're talking about when we say sex, and then why those things are not the same thing.
Okay. Well, gender identity essentially refers to the personal sense of one's own gender as far as it correlates to how you're born sexually, what sexual organs you have. So if you're born at birth as a man and you identify as a male, then you'd be considered cisgendered. Same thing goes for women. Essentially, if you don't identify with your biological sex, you may associate with being transgender, genderqueer, non-binary, androgynous, and there's also intersex people who possess several variations of sex characteristics as far as their biological makeup. As far as sexuality goes, that refers to your romantic or sexual attractions. So that's where we get terms like straight, heterosexual, homosexual. That's when you're attracted to someone of the same gender. Bisexual means you're attracted to both genders. Asexual, you have no sexual attraction or inclination. There's also demisexual people who have
I've never heard that.
Yeah, okay.
Demisexual.
Demisexual people are sexual. They have individuals who have sexual attractions based purely on a deep emotional connection. So that means you can essentially be attracted to anyone of any background, and also might be attracted to people outside of the binary genders of just men and women. There's androsexuality, the attraction to males or masculinity. So that's used by a lot of people who are maybe heterosexual, homosexual, or even queer individuals, as far as not necessarily just being attracted to men in a homosexual sense, or maybe you're attracted to women who look like men, who are more masculine.
Why are you staring at me? That felt so degrading. Please continue with your term.
You was
Please.
looking directly
You look straight at
me,
me.
and I looked up, and I'm like, eye contact. What is this?
There's gensexuality, so those are individuals. It's like the opposite of androsexuality, and individuals who are attracted to females or femininity. We covered bisexuality. There's pansexuality, so that's when you're attracted to all individuals regardless of their gender or biological sex. And then there's also people who are genderqueer. That's kind of the umbrella term for anyone who's not straight. People who are gay identify under that. People who are questioning identify under that. There are people who just consider themselves fluid in the sense that they don't want to look at gender in the binary sense of just men and women, but just choose to be attracted to people based on the person that it is, in a sense. There's unlabeled people who, similar to gender queer people, just don't want to identify to anything in particular. And then if you're straight, you could be an ally. So you're essentially someone who actively confronts heterosexism. And all of this operates under what's called the Kinsey scale. So that's the belief that sexuality operates on a fluid spectrum to help individuals articulate their identity.
That's very, very, very enlightening for me because I did not know. And a lot of that sounds, and I kind of get the confusion when it comes to sexuality because when I hear bisexual, I assume you mean bi, right? Or pansexual even, which is, but then when you say demi or something that's based on emotion, I was like, I thought that was sexuality in general. Like most people are driven by emotion and kind of in general. So that kind of sounds like it applies to even straight people in a way.
Yeah, you can be straight and be demisexual. That's essentially like you don't like random hookups. You have to really have a
I
deep
see.
emotional connection to someone to be able to be sexually attracted to someone.
So somebody that's demisexual doesn't participate in hookup culture.
Basically, yeah.
Right.
Okay. All
Right.
There, there's one I understand.
Anyway, I'm sure you do. But so that's very illuminating for me. Asexual, I feel like I still get so confused about because I feel like a lot of people go through that period where they're just like, man, F men or F women. So it's like you asexual maybe for that, or maybe you just had a year where just nothing happened for you.
Yeah,
So it's
maybe
like
you was just bad that year. Like you ain't.
Yeah, just didn't have any
You ain't
motivation
had
to
no
do
swag that year.
anything.
Like,
I mean, that's the thing about sexuality. The Kinsey scale essentially insinuates that sexuality is fluid, so at any given time it could change. You might not be that one sexuality for your entire life.
in the Kinsey scale, like how,
I've seen that when it comes to
like I've
now that I
seen
think
it,
about it.
but like all the new terms.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think the furthest I've seen was like pan, which
Yeah.
is, and you know what I'm saying. So you know,
So you're wondering about all the new acronyms?
yeah, like how
Yeah.
did all this stuff come about? Because like you said, like you would assume that people, like when you study psychology, this is like more the biology behind the
Yeah,
psychology.
it does feel like it's got a lot of biology behind it.
You know what I'm saying? So is it separate? Like I can be able to separate the biological terms, and then I guess, you know what I'm saying? Like,
So as far
I'm
as the
confused.
biological terms go, I think you're going back to gender. That's like physically who you identify as. That's when we get transgendered people, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Sexuality, that, again, applies to anyone. And then there's sexual terms that can apply to people who are completely different genders.
And then there's like expression, right? Like how you like express yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that's up to you as well, right? Or
Right.
is it not considered up to you?
Well, I have my thoughts and opinions on that. I think it's pretty hard to exist in a framework where we have this binary thinking because we are in a heteronormative patriarchal society that essentially insinuates that you're either a man or a woman, and then there's certain gender roles that go along with that. But the existence of all these different things, third genders and things going outside of that binary, has existed way before American civilization ever came into existence. So essentially the way we operate is under a European framework of thinking that extends back to, biblically, back to the church, back to the state, and even how we do medical practices with our medical authorities. But in other cultures and other societies, there's substantial evidence that exists that individuals have lived at least part of their lives as a different gender than assigned at birth. For example, there are youths who are raised in Afghanistan in opposite sex cultures, ranging from female husbands. There's Native American cultures who believe in two spirits as a third gender, and so that's an alternative to the male-female view. Essentially, in their culture, the two spirit, not necessarily practiced in every culture, but you know certain ones, they fulfill a sacred, spiritual, and ceremonial role. So they typically assume work and representative roles in their society that are traditionally occupied only by cisgendered men or women. So they kind of fill that gap.
You hear that female husbands.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting idea.
But this dates back to centuries, like 700 BCE, Greek society. All of this has existed way before us. But because of the way we were brought up, Christian and European colonizers and conquests, when they encountered that, immediately reacted negatively. And that even existed in, I have somewhere in here that existed in Israel back in the day. And that's specifically why in the Bible they said none of that. Like they were addressing it, essentially.
and I think like for me, when you study like the psychology of people, like you learn like things that didn't have terms have always existed. Like essentially is what you're saying. Like before there was a term for it. Like I think there's always been men to occupy women's roles in the home.
Right. it just didn't necessarily be termed in our society, but other societies have acknowledged it and embraced it in their own rights before we even came around.
Yeah, like I think that there has always been masculine features to women. There's always been masculine, feminine features to men that have always expressed themselves in different ways, but there was no name for it. And I think that's like the hardest thing is like every day is like a new name, and then every month is like a new term, and then you got to apply the term to something that would technically be like something in expression or an emotion. You have to apply a term to it. And for most people, it's going to be difficult. Like for me, I just didn't know all of them. Like I know how people act, and I know certain things that create emotion and create action in people. Naming it is different, or having a psychological name for it, and then next thing you know, like no, that thing that you were calling that is this. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like the cisgender. Like if you were straight, I thought you were straight. Now you're cisgender. You know what I'm saying?
Cisgender goes back to gender. You'd be heterosexual if you're straight. So those are two different things.
See, but it's like it comes to I think the debate is like how people come to understand what these are, because there's one side that says very much that it's just an understanding, it's just a given, like you were born like this is what it is, like, and there are what the science is basically saying is that no, actually everything you identify as has been taught, like it's been structured, it's in school, it's in your culture. And so that's why it is the way that it is. But people very much believe that, like, no, when you are born with ovaries, then you grow up understanding that you should be cooking and cleaning and smiling. And I mean, that's like a genuine frame of thought for a lot of people.
Yeah, but that's like the difference between belief and truth. Like there's truth and then there's belief. And I think like the application of those things is what identifies you. Like you can, whatever you apply to yourself, like that's you. So if you're this and you apply that, then that's what you are. It's hard for people to understand the application. Like we don't understand yet as like humans how to apply things as humans. We think we know, but then what we do is like we'll say, well, look at the way that the male lion or the male gorilla. Nah, bro, because you see like male gorillas apply the things that you would assume female gorillas do. So you see like a male be the like comforting or like nurturer in you know what I'm saying?
But there's actually there's a study that was cited about this, and it was taken in the Atlanta Zoo actually, but it was by a psychologist and a sociologist who used to work for the Center of Disease Control. And what he said was that he was observing primates, which I usually don't listen to immediately. Like, I hate hearing studies about people that have to do with apes. Yeah. But he was observing primates, and he basically it was about toxic masculinity or, like, male aggression. And he was basically citing these huge differences between the male apes and the female apes. And he was saying that the male apes basically communicated oftentimes with violence. Like, they approached each other and almost sized each other up and even got to know each other, sometimes by just, like, fighting with each other. But then you'd see them kind of decide, okay, that there was a winner and a loser to that fight, and sometimes sometimes the loser would go off or whatever, but eventually, as the days gone on or weeks went on, you would see them again doing whatever they did as apes. But as the female apes, they said they were less confrontational just in their regular interactions with each other, but when they were confrontational, there was no going back and being buddy-buddy at any given point ever in the future, period. Like, it just never happened.
But that's also in captivity.
Well, he basically considered the female apes to be more vindictive and just different, like far more sensitive to physical contact than the male apes were, who basically just used hitting and slapping each other around as like a way of life. Yeah. So he was basically making an argument that there are clear differences between females and males that are far bigger than just physical, that there's,
emotional.
I guess.
The question is, would they do that same study because there's a study of female apes and male apes in the wild. Female apes are much more violent towards male apes in the wild than you would assume. So you have like the male apes, like that's usually what we see. It's like two male apes sizing each other up, chest bumps, the slaps and stuff like that. You usually don't see female and male apes do that in the wild. But people that have observed it have said like female apes are much more violent than we assume them to be. And it's the same thing like with humans. Like we assume like y'all just be soft. But, like, everybody know, like, she might slip the razor from on her tongue real quick,
Oh,
cut
Lord
you
Jesus
up.
God.
I'm just saying.
But, okay,
But those
so...
studies are always like, they're always one-sided because it's usually like a man doing the study, and it's usually like one of those type of men doing the study. That's not us. And then he already got an opinion built.
Right.
Like, no, this is how it's supposed to be. So I'm gonna observe what matches what
But, like,
I agree with.
But I admit, even in trying to, like, research a little bit of this coming into today, some of the immediate research that I found, like actual research studies that were conducted, and like commentary and editorial articles, were all in vehement opposition to the creation of, or to the idea of there being any more than two genders. Like, that's what came up in, like, overwhelming, whether it was like videos or scholarly research. And it's just like, that to me is like, okay, the confusing part. Like, why is there a vehement opposition to it?
I think it's
You know what
like
I mean?
the voices of the people. Like, you don't hear many transgender voices. Like, not a lot of them. Like, you have all of these guys that are famously taking stances. Jordan Peterson, nope, it's only two genders. If you believe anything else, then you're going to hell. Like, somebody like that.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like, who's the guy that's going to be or the woman or it's so many terms. Like, I don't even, you know what I'm saying? Like, it gets to a point.
Person's usually always
Who
right.
would be the person to step up and say, no, it's this, and it's this, and it's this.
But so that's the argument for teaching in school as well, is that, you know, maybe we could cut through this ignorance if we just don't if we're not trying to educate masses of 50 and 60 and 70-year-olds, if we just educate children. You know what I mean? So but then there's opposition to that, but maybe that's a good idea. Is that
I
a
have
good
a
idea?
question. How is that healthy to teach a child? Because I think we talked about this last week about the school in Ireland. Like, parents bring their kids to school, little girl, little boy, and then make them change clothes at school. So make the little boy put on little girl clothes, and make the little girl put on little boy clothes, and have them switch genders in school. Is that healthy to teach children to be other genders, or what we consider, like, to teach a little boy to be a little girl, or to teach a little girl to be a little boy? Like, is that healthy versus just letting them grow up? And I know, like, the constructs suck, but I mean, if you're a little girl, like, just be a little girl, go do little girl stuff. And then if you grow up and you say, nah, I want to be a little boy, or I identify as this, like, I can't teach you to identify as something. I can teach you, hey, I want you to be a little girl. I want you to wear dresses. My daughter don't play with dolls, so I'm not going to be like, baby, I want you to go play with dolls. But is that healthy for us to, the same way that the opposition feels like it's unhealthy for you to force child into a construct, is it healthy for us to do the same thing going the other way?
Well, a few points that I didn't get to cover. One, I think that bias that we were talking about is part of the problem, and that is entrenched in the way we indoctrinate ourselves within culture and society, just in how we form our identities in general. So by having that binary bias of, well, you either have to fit within the constructs of being a man, a woman, or, you know, figure it out. If you can't figure it out and you don't end up somehow correlating your identity back to that, then there's still a problem. That's the problem within itself. Like, why do we have to have these very rigid definitions that we have to fit into? And I think that creates the confusion of even understanding one another when we're trying to express our identities to one another. It's like, well, that just doesn't make sense to me, because you're saying, I personally, I consider myself gender fluid. I consider myself non-binary, and that's because, in the words of Audre Lorde, you can't dismantle the master's house with his own tools. I don't want to sit here and operate under the constructs of the patriarchy and trying to explain myself, because essentially that's just going to lead you in the circle to where you're just back to, well, am I a man or a woman, essentially? And that doesn't work for all people. So going back to your question, research has shown that we construct our gender identities by the age of 3, and that it can be very harmful to try and reassign identity after that point, and that can actually result in gender dysphoria. So essentially very psychologically harmful to the child and leaving them confused. So while I don't necessarily agree that we should be sending kids to school and making them change into the other gender's clothing, I think that is an opportunity for them, in a sense, to learn about what it's like to walk in the other one's shoes. But I think there's definitely better ways to go about it, essentially.
I have thought there would be something valuable about men putting on some pumps and understanding just how difficult it is and how crazy
You're
it is.
not even open to
that
it. That's the problem.
Heels are shaped like a triangle. Like, have you ever seen a triangular human foot? It's crazy.
I understand. I got
Do you
6
understand?
aunts, 5 sisters.
Okay, but what if somebody doesn't?
I mean, that's maybe any man that doesn't understand that women have plights, women have problems that us as men will never have to go through, but we should understand like though they have problems, and I think like it's different to like apply a problem. Like you can't make a man apply a problem like you said, like this late in life. Like you have to teach children as children, hey, as a little boy, you as a little girl, you know what I'm saying? Like after 5, like I can't just go and tell my daughter like dress up as a little boy. You a little boy now?
Yeah.
Well, no, but it can't be forced on you. But like I think the question is really like,
Is there
it's not about the
a
force
healthy
on-
way to introduce this to a child?
Part of that is the societal structures, is what I'm trying to say. What makes it unhealthy is having these really rigid formats that they're feeling like they have to abide to, and not leaving them open to interpretation and just figuring it out on their own, essentially.
Can you talk about what the consequences are, though? Because I think people don't understand what it feels like to have to conform to gender. I feel like on the opposite side, people don't really get where the harm is. If someone calls you she when you don't identify as a female, or with female gender pronouns, like I feel like people don't understand the consequences, whether it's emotional or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
what does that do to a young person?
That essentially immediately from the beginning of their life ostracizes them from society, and they're already feeling like an outsider when really they're facing some of the same issues and problems that everyone's going through. Even if you're a cisgender dude who's always lived as a dude, I'm sure you're going through your own gender identity issues and having to conform to, well, I don't like to play sports even though I'm a boy. I don't like to play with trucks even though I'm a boy. Like, you might like things that are technically feminine, that are technically whatever outside of what you've been prescribed, and it's just making your life difficult. So it's just alienating us from each other and making it more difficult to discuss, more difficult to be open-minded, and more difficult to explore yourself in a public forum, in a space where really your interactions with other human beings is the only way you can do that. You're just getting shut down before you even have the chance to really figure yourself out, regardless of what your identity is.
On Facebook and on IG, I asked the same question in 2 different places, and on one, they've said school should absolutely teach this, and the other, they said school should absolutely not teach this. But it's like, parents aren't, right? I mean, like...
Yeah. I think it's a little extreme to make kids change clothes, but I do think it's important to teach gender equality at a young age. And also, high heels were originally for men, and it showed their...
Well, fair.
The higher the heel, there was showed how more masculine you were. But I don't know what time in history that switched for women to wear heels. But
when men realize they can make money off of it.
They just weren't shaped like that. But I know what you're talking about, just like the
that's where
big
the
blonde
wedge
wigs
come
or the
from.
big gray wigs.
Like the wedge come from that. Like
Yeah.
men were wearing wedges.
But they weren't shaped like that.
Like what clogs essentially look like.
yeah.
Those hideous.
They are horrible
Okay.
looking shoes, but
Here's the thing, though. Like, I feel like there are different types of people. And, like, even now, even just among men, there's, like, all this conversation about what makes somebody an alpha male versus, like, a beta male. You know what I mean? And, like, what makes someone really, really masculine, and this idea that you just have to fit into, like there's a stereotype about what makes somebody a man and whether or not men should be crying, or whether or not men should be household dads. And like even in the parenting conversation now in Canada, men get paternity leave because it's considered like 2 people have brought a life into the world. Why should only one person get 6 weeks?
leave, yeah.
Right. But in America, we don't really acknowledge that. We don't have nationally, employers aren't required to recognize that.
and I think it's because like with science, like they assume like you can apply animal science to humans. So what you would they say like, oh well, humans are more related to the primate, which is untrue. But like when you watch how the application of science to primates, and then they tell you how you should apply it as a human, like that's where they like men primates don't cry. That's untrue. Like if you ever been to Atlanta Zoo, the first time I went to Atlanta Zoo, I saw Willie B. This before he died. Like the first time I saw him, he was sitting in the corner crying. And he was like, well, he's upset because he can't have a banana right now.
I see.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
I
teaching
feel
a
like
child
that pressure definitely exists, though.
is weird.
I feel like that pressure definitely exists. I really
It does. I feel like it's going to be generations of children, like after us, that eventually get it right. Because I don't think that we aren't in a place where we can get it right. Like this or the next 3 generations, not going to get it right.
Well, so here's what's coming up, and that I want to get into a little bit more. So on the table right now, I feel like politicians are already starting to kind of catch wind about what's going on, and in Kansas, there are more rights being created. So in Kansas right now, transgender people will no longer have to, will actually have petitioned to where you no longer have to have your gender on your state ID or on your driver's license. On birth certificates in other states, that's becoming a norm. They're no longer going to put male or female. And even in schools, I think, and definitely lots of places around, even Georgia, there are no longer gender-based bathrooms. So, like, the culture is changing, and different things are changing. There's a few more pieces of policy on the table, but I know we need to take another quick break, so we're going to do that and then come back and talk more about gender and sex on the Leadership Blend.
I want to stay south of the river with the chains and the gold. We could be out here together, but you have places to go. Watching the sunshine lace the gray. I don't know why you wouldn't stay. You should come south of the river, where the loving is gold. You should come south of the river. This is where it all starts. I think that we could stay here forever, lie on the roof till it's dark. And when the last bus pulls away, I swear that I almost heard you say I should move south of the river. I want to get to know. I want to get to know. I want to stay south of the river.
Are you a leader or influencer who is ready to progress over your pain? Lisa Sunshine is a global life coach and marketplace minister who is ready to connect with you. As a certified life coach, Lisa Sunshine will help you pinpoint and overcome secrets, shame, and fear. Lisa can be contacted at shareyoursunshine.com. If you're ready to move from broken to blessed, don't wait. Contact her today. Leaders don't create excuses. Leaders create effective change.
All right, coming back to the Leadership Blend, we have just a few minutes left, and we were talking about sex and gender identity, and during the break we came up with you stumbled upon a really good point. I feel like the reason that this has become even more contentious is because people have kind of weighed social issues and justice issues, and they've put identity and gender in a certain spot. Like, we think about race as being probably the most ugly issue in America's history, and there's still race gaps. Then when we talk about just gender, like the gender pay gap between men and women, or the rights of women versus the rights of men, we have so many issues there. And then we're talking about gender identity, and we brought up again like another issue, another area in which things just don't seem to be fair. But we know we can't go in order with these things all the time. Like, there are probably certainly Native Americans who felt like, you know what, we've been pushed onto these reservations for the last over 100 years, and now African Americans have ensured that they've got civil rights and voting rights, and, you know, are able to be elected to office, and they may have felt very slighted that African Americans were able to do what we did, even though it did take hundreds and hundreds of years. So my big question is, like, is there a reason not to just push for the progress now? And if so, like, where's the best place to start? Because I'm not gonna lie, when we were talking about bathroom policy, I was like, bathrooms? Like, is that the biggest issue? It was like using a bathroom? Like, surely there's like more fundamental problems. Like, there's so much bullying and violence, you know what I mean? Like, towards certain people. Like, we know that there's a high suicide rate for certain groups of people, especially for transgender students and even for young people. So I'm like, why are we talking about bathrooms? But it's like, is anything, you know, really off the table?
I think we have to think about the issues that affect the most privileged people in our country, and those are usually the ones that end up actually pushing the legislation, end up leading the movements. Even in the LGBTQ movement and all the other letters, women ended up getting mad that all the gay guys were leading the movement, and the lesbians were just like, but what about us? So they ended up splitting off and having their own separate movement inspired by feminism. So it's essentially going to come down to what issues are affecting those with the most power.
That's what I'm saying. Like, people can't even agree to fight for the same issue. It's the same issue. We on this side, you on that side, and we have the same problem. But because we're on this side, and like, women got mad that men that are feminine was making decisions. Hey, you're both on the same side. It doesn't matter. He's a man. He didn't never. Y'all can't come to some kind of y'all don't even want to have a conversation.
While we might have certain intersectional issues in that we're coming together based on things of a fight on gender and sexual, you know, equality and things of that nature, there are going to be issues that only women face that guys don't get. So we want to voice those opinions too. So if you literally don't know what's going on with us, how can you lead a movement for us? But
that's what I'm saying. Why not hey, we need to come together and do this. Like, it's the same thing we was talking about, like, with the black thing. Like, all black people don't agree with all black. All of them don't agree with all black issues.
True.
How do you expect to get anything done?
I mean, even with affirmative action, from what I hear, it essentially sounds like you're upset because black people led the movement, so we deserve to get the most rights out of it. But now we have all these other minorities coming in and muddying the waters because they want rights too.
Right.
So essentially, in the movement, black people could have been mad that, you know, Asian Americans weren't helping out.
No, I think that the whole movement is muddy. It's been muddy because it applied to it. It never applied. You have a group of people that said that we fought for this. Well, you have other groups of people that say, well, we here too. They weren't acknowledged. And now that they're being acknowledged, you're having black people argue like, oh, they getting more acknowledgement. Why not fight together? Like, if all y'all minorities, if you're a minority and you say I am a minority, you can't be like, but I'm like a degree higher than you as a minority. Like, I'm a 36 and you like a 34 and a half. You can't do that.
So how can and I don't mean to even say like how can straight people, but I just mean how can people who aren't involved, like the allies that we talk about are sometimes so important. Like when you talked about issues of privilege, I felt like a lot of white people were responsible for a lot of the civil rights movement success. Like there were white people on those buses, white people who were freedom riders and white people who were protesting that I felt like probably made a big difference because now the people who started to care started to look different than just the people who were affected. So it's like when people are cisgender and when they refer to themselves as he and him because that's just how they were born, like, is there a way that other people can do something, or is it just not a good idea? Like, And in what way can they kind of advocate for that?
I definitely think it's going to be difficult to have a balanced conversation in any sense, in any revolutionary movement that we have, because we just have so many issues going on. But I do feel like the first part of that is allies, anyone that has a place of privilege, using their privilege to an advantage to the disenfranchised, using their privilege as a platform for those issues to be brought to light. If you're a cisgendered white dude who's spearheading a gay movement, why not let the lesbians, the black lesbians who are sitting here like, we're getting hated on much harder than you, just give them a second to have their shine and voice their issues, and then that way we at least have it on the table, and then use that as a platform to continue the movement as a whole, instead of the white dudes just leading it blind, essentially.
Yeah, because that's essentially like what we saw, like in civil rights. Like they would pay for, like you had like the white allies, hey, whenever you go to a hotel, we'll pay for it. No, I want you to step out here and get beat up with me. Like I'm getting stumped out in the street, come get stumped out with me. And then you start seeing it. Over time, you would start seeing like white people like, nah, we out here with them. Like if you gonna beat them up, you gotta beat us up too. And then everybody get beat up and everybody go to jail.
What about something as simple as just using the pronouns? Like using proper pronouns. Like, is that difficult?
It's too late.
How's it too late?
Because it's this generation. It's too late. The like I said, like forcing it on children is one thing. I think that it's going to get to a point where kids will understand. Like they understand race better than we do. They understand race way better than we do. So I think that the kids or their kids will eventually get it right. With us, nah.
But people did say that back in the day about race too. Like they were basically saying like, listen, we've got these slaves, like we could not free them. Like if we free these slaves, they will ride up against us.
Look at us now. Who got it right?
But people kept pushing though. People kept saying like, no, we cannot postpone justice. That's not how it works. We have to do it. We have to rip the Band-Aid off, basically.
But like Pac said, like I might not be the one to make that change, but it's gonna be somebody that come after me.
So you think really we're too ignorant? Like you're basically saying this generation's too ignorant.
I do. I think that the children, and we're seeing it. The children that are coming up now understand emotion way better than we have, because we were never taught to understand emotion. We just like, nah, you're a man, you're a woman, that's what it is. They're more compassionate than we are.
So when you say we can't force it upon them, in what sense do you mean? Because you're saying they're more well educated on all these topics than we are just because of their upbringing. Wouldn't educating them about all these differences when it comes to gender and sexuality help them spur that conversation?
I
putting
think
dresses on a little boy.
No, I'm saying that introducing the information. I think that our generation is too ignorant to even embrace the information.
But
their generation is like, let me at least look at it.
I feel like as a society, we've made a lot of progress from where we came from, like in the 50s, to even be having a conversation right now. So I just think that we should, like I said earlier, we should like train our kids to be more inclusive of all genders and all sexualities.
That's well said.
Yeah.
Well said, Kyle. Final thoughts for Rhea.
I need a second to think about it.
Okay, go ahead, Double R.
So
I know we're past time.
This was dope. Me and Rhea got some stuff coming. Got a YouTube series coming called Top 10. Want to announce that we're gonna have a couple announcements over the next couple weeks. I think this is very dope. We're introducing a lot of barbershop talk to random conversations, and it's gonna be dope from culture, hip hop, food, entrepreneurship, business. Like it's gonna be very dope. So y'all stay tuned. Y'all look for that.
All right, cool stuff.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I got mine. I'm having a casting call for a documentary I'm making actually on gender and sexuality. It's going to be called Solidarity and Identity. Hopefully to bring inclusiveness to the table and just make people more well educated, less confused, so we can all be a part of it together and not fighting each other because we're ignorant.
That's very true. My final thought will just be that it's also got to be a little bit of laziness too. I also think we got to kind of take accountability for. We have a lot of information in our society. A lot of times if we're not doing something, it's just because there's a laziness. There's like a resistance, I think. So anyway, I think it was kind of fun taking over Ricardo's usual format.
Ricardo, stay gone for at least 2-3 more days,
right,
man.
No rush back. But Monday we will be obviously doing another episode of Leadership Blend from 12 to 2. So thank you everybody for being so active on social and for voicing your very, very, very strong opinions. There are obviously a lot of strong opinions about gender identity, no matter who you are. So we also, I think, need to get back into this topic too soon. Yep. But all right, everybody have a good weekend. God bless.
All right.
Radio.